What would you do if you had only one meal left, and a stranger walked in, starving and soaked from the rain, begging for food? Would you give it away? She did. Ellie Carter was a broke waitress in a dying town. No savings, no future barely hanging on. But one stormy night, she handed her last plate of food to a man she didn't know, and walked away hungry. She never imagined that same man would come back, not in rags, but in a suit, not for a meal, but to change her life. What started as a quiet act of kindness would unravel into a story of second chances, love found in the unlikeliest place, and a question we all have to answer. When the world gives you nothing, do you still choose to give? The rain pelted the windshield like 1,000 tiny fists, and the glow of the neon diner sign flickered against the stormy night like a dying heartbeat. Out in the middle of nowhere, off a forgotten highway in West Virginia, Sonny's 24-hour grill stood like a stubborn survivor, a place where the coffee was always hot and the stories were always unfinished. Inside, the place was nearly empty. One tired trucker sat in the back booth, nursing a lukewarm refill, the faint buzz of country music humming from the wall-mounted radio. The linoleum floor squeaked every time the wind howled, and the door groaned on its hinges. Behind the counter was Ellie Carter. 26, thin from stress, her dark curls tied back, her apron stained from a 12-hour shift. She wiped down a cracked countertop with muscle memory, her body aching and her soul even more so. She hadn't eaten since breakfast, and that was just a granola bar. Then it happened. The bell above the door jingled sharply. A gust of wind and rain whipped in, scattering a few napkins off a table. A man stood in the doorway, soaked to the bone, hair matted to his forehead, coat torn at the shoulder. His boots were caked in mud, and his eyes looked hollow, haunted, lost. Ellie froze instinctively on guard. Strangers this late. Out here, never a good sign. But the man didn't move aggressively. In fact, he didn't move at all. Just stood there trembling slightly, like it took every ounce of strength just to stay upright. Slowly he stepped forward and approached the counter. His voice was a rasp barely audible over the rain slamming the roof. I don't have any money, but I haven't eaten in days. I can pay you back. I swear. Just something to eat. Anything. Ellie clenched the rag in her hands. She knew that tone. She'd lived that tone. She looked toward the kitchen window. The last plate of food, mashed potatoes, eggs, and bacon, wasn't for sale. It was hers. Her dinner. Her only meal today. But then she looked at him. The way his eyes flicked toward the plate like a starved animal. The way his shoulders curled inward like someone used to hearing no. And in that moment, something shifted. Without a word, Ellie reached under the heat lamp and placed the plate in front of him. "Eat," she said softly. The man blinked like he didn't believe her. His hands shook as he picked up the fork. The first bite was slow, then another, and suddenly the food disappeared. It was devoured with the desperation of someone who hadn't tasted kindness, or food, in days. Ellie watched in silence, her stomach aching, but her heart strangely calm. She didn't know who he was, didn't ask. But as the wind howled and the storm raged outside, something told her this moment would echo far beyond this night. Because sometimes the smallest act of compassion happens at the exact moment it's needed most. And this was only the beginning. The door clicked shut behind her with a dull thud, and for a second, Ellie Carter just stood there, drenched, exhausted, and overwhelmed. The storm had followed her all the way home, and so had the gnawing hunger in her gut. The meal she gave away still lingering in her mind. She didn't regret it, not even for a second. But now the reality of her own life came crashing back like a flood. Her apartment was a box carved out of a crumbling building on the wrong side of Charleston. A flickering hallway bulb lit the peeling green paint and creaky floorboards as she walked to her door, unlocked it, and stepped into a world too small for dreams. Inside, the heat barely worked. The radiator clanged like a dying engine, and the musty scent of old carpet clung to the air like a stain. The place was part living room, part kitchen, and all claustrophobia. A single worn-out couch sat under a window sealed with duct tape. She dropped her purse on a milk crate she used as a side table and ran a hand over her face. From the couch, a soft voice called out, "Ellie." Her heart softened. Grace, her mother, frail bundled beneath layers of blankets, looked up with tired eyes. A once vibrant woman, now shrunken by illness and years of bad breaks. Her skin had grown pale, her breathing shallow but steady. Ellie knelt beside her. "You should be asleep. Couldn't you eat?" The question was gentle, but it hit like a punch. Ellie gave a quiet nod and forced a lie through her smile. "Yeah, I did. Don't worry about me." Grace reached for her hand, her fingers as thin as twigs still warm with love. "You always give too much of yourself, baby. You can't pour from an empty cup." Ellie swallowed the lump in her throat and smiled. "Then I'll just have to find a bigger cup." But even as she joked, she could feel the truth pressing against her like the walls of this tiny apartment. There wasn't much left of her to give. She stood and walked to the kitchen and opened her wallet. One crumpled dollar bill. That's it. She turned to the cabinet and pulled out a small amber pill bottle. Her mother's medication. She shook it gently. 4 pills. She needed at least 20 more to get through the next week. The pharmacy wouldn't refill without full payment. 18's 99, and payday was still 5 days away. A knock broke the silence. She tensed. When she opened the door, Mr. Watkins, her landlord, stood there. Jacket damp from the rain expression, stone cold. "Ellie, it's the 4th. Rent was due on the 1st. "I know, You said that last month. Look, I've been patient, but if you don't have it by Friday, I'll have to give notice." He didn't wait for a response, just turned and disappeared down the stairs. Ellie stood in the doorway, stunned. Thunder cracked above her. She had nothing, no money, no food, no plan, and yet her mind kept going back to the man in the diner, the way he looked at her when she handed him that plate, like no one had ever seen him before. "I did the right thing," she whispered to herself. But as she curled up on the couch next to her mother and watched the storm claw at her window, one haunting question echoed in her heart. Will things ever get better? The morning sun filtered weakly through the grimy blinds of Ellie's apartment, casting pale streaks of light across the cluttered kitchen table. She stirred a spoon through a chipped mug of instant coffee, not to drink it, but just for the warmth against her fingers. It had been a week since that night at the diner. A week since she gave away her only dinner to a stranger who looked like he hadn't been seen in years. She hadn't seen him since, and truth be told, she never expected to. The days blurred together, back-to-back shifts, sleepless nights calculating how many pills her mom could skip without spiraling. Hope wasn't something Ellie allowed herself anymore. It felt dangerous, like it might burn her if she got too close. So, when Betty, the diner owner, called out her name during the lull between the breakfast and lunch rush, waving a thick cream-colored envelope in her hand, Ellie barely looked up. "Ellie, this came for you." "For me?" she asked, brow furrowed. "No return address. Fancy paper, though." Ellie wiped her hands on her apron and took the envelope. It was heavier than it looked. Expensive. The kind of thing people with manicured hands sent to each other. Her name was written in bold, clean script. Her stomach twisted. She opened it slowly. Inside was a one-way plane ticket to Los Angeles and a single handwritten note. "I told you I wouldn't forget. Come to this address." Ellie's hands shook. The air around her seemed to still. Her first thought, is this a scam? Her second, is this real? She looked at the plane ticket again. Departure tomorrow morning. Los Angeles? She had never left West Virginia, never flown anywhere. She couldn't even afford a bus ride across town. Betty noticed the look on her face. "Everything all right, hon?" Ellie nodded slowly, folding the ticket and slipping it back into the envelope. "Yeah, just surprised, that's all." But her mind was spinning. Why would he do this? Why now? Why her? She didn't even know his name. Just a letter. She thought about her mom, about the final few pills on the counter, about the eviction notice that would come in just 2 days, about the ceiling stain that had grown into the shape of a noose. And suddenly it didn't feel so crazy. In fact, it felt like the only shot she had. That night after her shift, she packed a small duffel bag, 3 shirts, a pair of jeans, and her mother's photograph. She left a note for Betty explaining everything, and another for her mom, promising she'd send money as soon as she could. When morning came, Ellie stood at the boarding gate, staring through the terminal window at the plane outside. Her heart thundered with fear. But beneath that fear was a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Maybe this wasn't just a ticket to California. Maybe it was a ticket to a life she hadn't dared to believe in. The taxi slowed to a crawl as it turned onto a private road, flanked by sculpted hedges and tall wrought iron gates. Ellie leaned forward, her forehead nearly touching the window, as she tried to process what she was seeing. Beyond the gates, outlined in gold lettering, was the name Kingsley Estate. The cab driver whistled low under his breath. "You sure you got the right address, miss?" Ellie glanced down at the note in her hand. Same street, same number, same signature R. "I guess I'll find out." The gates opened with a low mechanical hum, and the car eased forward onto a perfectly paved driveway that curved through lush gardens and ended at the foot of a sprawling white mansion. Every window sparkled in the California sun. An infinity pool shimmered beyond the house, overlooking the Los Angeles skyline. Ellie's breath caught in her throat. This was another world. She stepped out onto the gravel driveway, her worn sneakers crunching against the stone. Her old duffel bag looked absurd against the pristine luxury surrounding her. Before she could knock, the massive double doors opened, revealing a sharply dressed older man with silver hair and a neutral expression. "Miss Carter, Mr. Kingsley is expecting you." He turned without waiting for a reply, and Ellie followed, her heart pounding so loudly she could hear it in her ears. The interior was even more stunning. Marble floors, glass walls, a chandelier that looked like it belonged in a palace. Every inch of this place screamed power, wealth, and distance from everything Ellie had ever known. They entered a sunlit sitting room, and there he was. The man from the diner, but this wasn't the same person who had stumbled in, half frozen and starving. He was seated comfortably on a modern leather couch, wearing a crisp navy shirt and tailored slacks. Clean-shaven, hair neatly styled, confident, composed. Nothing like the hollow-eyed stranger she had fed one rainy night. He stood. "Ellie." Her mouth went dry. "What the hell is going on?" A faint sheepish smile touched his lips. "I owe you an explanation." He gestured for her to sit. She hesitated, then lowered herself into the plush couch across from him, clutching her bag tightly. "My full name is Reed Kingsley," he said, "founder and CEO of Kingsley Dynamics." Ellie blinked. She'd heard that name. Everyone had tech mogul, self-made billionaire, magazine covers, interviews, a legend in Silicon Valley. But years ago, Reed continued, "I wasn't that man. I was homeless, broke, lost, sleeping in bus stations, eating out of dumpsters." He looked away, his voice dropping. "I lost everything, my job, my home, my dignity, and then one day someone helped me, gave me a shot, and it changed my life." He looked at her now, his eyes softer. "That night at the diner, I didn't plan it. I just needed a meal. I didn't even think you'd say yes." "I didn't do anything special," Ellie whispered. "I just gave you food." "You gave me dignity," he said, "and I never forgot it." Silence settled between them. Then Reed leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I want to repay your kindness. I want to offer you a chance to start again, the way someone once did for me." Ellie's heart pounded in her chest. Was this real? And more importantly, could she dare to believe it? Ellie stood in the elevator, her knuckles white as she clutched her bag, watching the digital numbers climb. Floor 18, floor 19, floor 20. Her reflection stared back at her from the polished stainless steel, nervous eyes, hair pulled back too tight, blouse one size too big. She didn't look like someone who belonged in a corporate tower. The doors opened with a soft ding. This was Kingsley Dynamics, one of the fastest growing tech firms in the country. And somehow, she was about to walk into it. Not as a temp, not as a receptionist, but as a junior assistant in the business development department. A real job, a real paycheck, all arranged by Reed Kingsley. He had been clear the day before. "This isn't a handout, Ellie. It's an opportunity. You've earned more than the life you were given. Now, it's time to take it." The office floor buzzed with sharp heels and low murmurs. Sleek glass walls, minimalist furniture, designer suits. Ellie took a breath and stepped inside. By lunch, she already felt like she was drowning. Everyone seemed to speak in a language she didn't understand. KPIs, ROIs, vertical scaling. She nodded through conversations, wrote notes she didn't know how to decode, and smiled through every awkward introduction. She caught the glances. She saw the whispers. 2 women by the water cooler tilted their heads when she passed. "That's her." The waitress Reed brought in. "Wow." The weight of their judgment clung to her like a second skin. That night in the guest room of Reed's mansion, Ellie sat on the floor with a notebook in her lap and a YouTube tutorial playing on her phone, Business Strategy 101. She scribbled, furiously desperate to absorb anything. She wasn't going to quit. Not now. The next day was no better. She messed up the formatting on a proposal, stumbled through a client meeting, and nearly cried in the elevator. But she stayed late again. And the next night, and the next. Reed passed by one evening as she sat alone under fluorescent lights, flipping through a printed report. Eyes red. "You're still here." "Trying to figure out what EBITDA actually means," she muttered. He smiled, placing a protein bar on her desk. "You'll get it. You're tougher than you think. They don't want me here. They don't know you yet. I don't know me yet." Reed paused, then said something she would carry with her for the rest of her life. "You don't have to be perfect to belong. You just have to show up for yourself. Every day." The next morning, Ellie did just that. She asked more questions. She watched, listened, learned. She found a rhythm even if it wasn't perfect. There were setbacks, sure, but slowly, painfully, she began to feel capable. 3 weeks later, she caught the same women from the water cooler watching her during a presentation. But this time, they weren't smirking. They were listening. 3 months. That's how long it had been since Ellie first walked through the glass doors of Kingsley Dynamics with trembling hands and a heart full of doubt. And now, she was still here, still standing, still learning, and slowly changing. The early mornings were brutal, the late nights endless. She lived in two worlds, polished corporate offices by day, self-taught crash courses by night. Her bedroom floor was littered with notebooks, sticky notes, and diagrams she'd drawn to understand basic economics. Google had become her best friend Excel, her newest nemesis. But progress was happening. One afternoon during a marketing strategy meeting, the director stumbled over a question about emerging demographics. Ellie raised her hand. "Actually, I think we're missing a growing audience. Gen Z consumers who prioritize transparency. They're not just buying a product, they're buying a mission." The room fell silent. Then the director nodded. "That's a very good point." For the first time, Ellie didn't shrink into her chair. She sat straighter. She felt the shift. Not just in how they saw her, but in how she saw herself. Still, the whispers didn't disappear completely. She's Kingsley's project, charity hire. But Ellie no longer let them sink in. She had work to do, a mother to support, a future to claim. At home, if one could call a guest suite in a billionaire's mansion home, Reed continued to support her, but from a respectful distance. He never pushed, never hovered. But sometimes their paths crossed late at night in the kitchen, both nursing leftover takeout or microwave tea. One night, Ellie found him there, leaning against the counter, sleeves rolled up, tie gone. "Long day?" he asked. She nodded, sliding onto a stool. "I rewrote a proposal 4 times before realizing I was solving the wrong problem." He chuckled. "That sounds like most of my 20s. She looked at him. Not the CEO, not the man on magazine covers, just Reed with laugh lines and tired eyes and a quiet way of making her feel safe. She wasn't blind. She noticed the way he looked at her sometimes, the way his voice softened when they spoke, the way he always made sure she had everything she needed, but never too much, never enough to make her feel small. And she noticed something in herself too, a spark, a warmth, a flicker of something that hadn't existed in her chest for a very long time. Trust. At work, she continued to prove herself. She collaborated on projects, contributed ideas, and even trained a new intern. 3 months ago, she had no idea what a market trend analysis was. Now she was leading one. And Reed noticed he wasn't just watching her become something more. He was watching her become herself. And with every passing day as she gained confidence in the boardroom, she also started to feel something stirring in the quiet spaces between them, something neither of them dared to name. Yet, the night of the gala arrived like a thunderclap, sudden, overwhelming, and impossible to ignore. Ellie stood in front of the full-length mirror in her guest suite, trying not to panic. The dress, a sleek navy gown with delicate lace at the sleeves, had been chosen by Reed's assistant. It fit perfectly, too perfectly, like it belonged to someone else, someone who grew up attending charity balls and sipping champagne on rooftops. Not a girl who used to count quarters for gas money. She smoothed her palms down the fabric and tried to breathe. "You ready?" Reed's voice called from the hallway. She stepped out, and for a moment he just stared. "You look—" He paused, searching for the right words. "Incredible. Like an imposter," she muttered. He offered a small smile. "Trust me, you belong." But that wasn't how it felt when they arrived. The Kingsley Foundation Gala was held in a grand ballroom with vaulted ceilings, crystal chandeliers, and walls dripping with gold trim. The guests, CEOs, philanthropists, senators, moved with the kind of confidence that came from generations of inherited wealth. Ellie tried to blend in, tried to hold her glass just right to nod when others spoke about hedge funds and private equity. But every laugh felt hollow, every word a foreign language. She caught the glances, not cruel, not overt, but pointed. A man in a tux leaned in to one of Reed's partners. "Is that her, the one from the diner?" Another whispered, "She's just a project." Ellie turned away from the murmurs and slipped out onto the balcony. The night air was crisp, the city lights below glittering like a universe she couldn't touch. She wrapped her arms around herself and leaned on the railing, trying to push down the sting in her chest. This wasn't about the dress. This was about the truth. No matter how far she had come, this world still felt like a costume. The language, the rhythm, the elegance, it all belonged to someone else. She felt Reed's presence before she heard his voice. "You okay?" She didn't turn, just needed some air. "You're doing great in there. They're not the problems," she said quietly. "It's me." He frowned. "What do you mean?" She turned to him, eyes glossy. "I don't belong in there. I don't think I ever will." Reed stepped closer, but not too close. "Not yet. You've earned every inch of where you are. Maybe, but I'm still that girl from Charleston. And no matter how hard I try, I don't think I want to change that." They stood in silence for a long moment. Ellie didn't say anything else, and Reed didn't push. Because somewhere in that quiet, both of them knew something had shifted. A fracture had formed. Not in what they felt for each other, but in the fragile bridge between the two worlds they came from. The days that followed the gala felt heavier, like walking through fog with bricks in her shoes. At the office, Ellie continued to perform. She showed up early, delivered sharp insights in meetings, and smiled when spoken to, but beneath the surface something had fractured. The Gala hadn't just shaken her confidence, it had confirmed what she feared most. This world wasn't built for people like her, and no amount of learning or adapting could erase the feeling that she was always one misstep away from falling back into the life she'd barely escaped. Reed noticed the change. She laughed less, stayed quieter in meetings. She no longer lingered in the kitchen late at night. The easy conversations and subtle glances they used to share. Gone. Something unspoken had come between them. One evening, as she packed up her things long after everyone else had gone home, Reed appeared in the doorway of her office. "Ellie." She looked up, startled. "Hey, didn't think anyone was still here." "Neither did I." He hesitated before stepping inside. "You've been distant." She lowered her eyes to her laptop screen. "Just busy. Is that all it is?" The silence stretched too long. Finally, Ellie stood, sliding her bag over her shoulder. "I don't know if I can do this, Reed." His brows knit together. "Do what?" "This life," she whispered. "Your world. The business. The pressure." She looked at him now. Really looked. The man who had once walked into her diner, desperate and invisible, now wore the armor of the elite. Suits, meetings, power. But even now she could still see the man beneath it. The one who devoured a plate of eggs like it was the first act of kindness he'd tasted in years. "I thought I could fit in," she said. "I really did. But I feel like I'm losing myself." Reed's voice was quiet. "I never asked you to change." "You didn't have to," she replied. "This place, these people, they expect it." She paused, then added, "And I don't want to wake up one day and not recognize the girl who gave you that plate of food." Reed's jaw tightened, emotion flickering behind his eyes. "So, what are you saying?" Ellie took a breath that seemed to echo through the room. "I need to go, back home, back to what's real for me." He looked away, then nodded slowly. "I don't want you to leave." Her voice trembled. "I know." And that was it. No dramatic goodbye. No last kiss. Just two people standing on opposite ends of a life neither of them had expected. Knowing love wasn't always enough to bridge the space between two different worlds. The next morning, Ellie packed her bag, called a cab, and left the mansion without fanfare. As she pulled away, she caught one last glimpse of Reed standing at the front doors, hands in his pockets watching her leave. And in that silence, something shattered. Because sometimes walking away is the bravest thing a heart can do. The bell above the door chimed with a familiar jingle, and Ellie Carter looked up from the coffee pot, forcing a smile that barely touched her eyes. "Welcome to Sonny's. Sit anywhere you like." It had been a month since she left Los Angeles. A month since she'd walked away from a life she never imagined, and a man she had started to love. She was back where it all began, back in Charleston, back in her old apartment, back at the corner booth of Sonny's 24-hour grill. The scent of frying bacon and burnt toast clung to her clothes, and the ache in her feet reminded her that some things never change. And yet, at first it had been a relief to breathe air that didn't reek of ambition. To see her mother smile again, to sleep in her own bed, to hear the clatter of the diner that had always been her second home. But as the days turned into weeks, the numbness set in. She poured coffee, took orders, wiped counters. And every night when the world quieted down, she found herself reaching for something that wasn't there. She missed the challenge, the thrill of learning something new, the quiet encouragement in Reed's voice. But most of all, she missed him. Not the billionaire, not the CEO, him, the man who saw her when no one else did. The man who believed in her when she couldn't believe in herself. She tried to push the thoughts away, tried to convince herself that she'd made the right decision, that she had chosen her life, the one rooted in grit and honesty, not glitz and glass towers. But late at night, lying awake on her sagging mattress, the truth haunted her. She hadn't just left a job. She hadn't just left a man. She had left behind the version of herself she had almost become. The stronger version, the bolder one. And she missed that woman more than she could say. Her mother noticed the distance, too. "You sure you're okay, baby?" she'd ask gently. "Just tired," Ellie would reply. But fatigue wasn't the problem. It was longing. One slow Tuesday afternoon, the diner was nearly empty. Ellie was restocking sugar packets when the door opened again. "Sit anywhere you like," she called without turning. No response. She looked up. Her heart stopped. Standing in the doorway in worn jeans and a simple button-down shirt, no Rolex, no assistant, no aura of power, was Reed Kingsley. He looked ordinary. He looked like her world. For a long moment, they just stared at each other, frozen. Then slowly Reed took a step forward. "Hi." Her throat tightened. "What are you doing here?" He swallowed hard. "Looking for you." The clatter of plates, the soft hiss of the coffee machine, and the country song humming through the overhead speakers all seemed to fade into the background. Ellie Carter stood still behind the counter, her hand gripping a menu she no longer remembered picking up. Reed Kingsley, the man she had walked away from, was standing right in front of her. And he wasn't wearing power. He wasn't cloaked in money or prestige. He was just Reed, hair a little messy, shirt sleeves rolled up, eyes tired but clearer than she'd ever seen them. "Can we talk?" he asked gently. Ellie nodded, motioning toward the far booth in the corner. The same booth where she'd given him his first plate of food that rainy night months ago. The place where it all began. They sat in silence for a moment, the distance between them thick with everything unsaid. Reed finally broke it. "After you left, I tried to go back, to work, to the boardroom, to everything that made sense before you walked into my life." He smiled faintly, but it didn't make sense anymore. Ellie stared down at her hands. Her fingers trembled slightly, but she didn't stop him. "I kept telling myself that it was better this way." He continued, "That you were happier, that I was fine, but I wasn't. Ellie, none of it matters without you." Her breath caught. "You don't belong in my world," he said, "and I don't belong in yours. But maybe we could make our own." She looked up, blinking through a blur of tears. "You gave me a chance when I didn't believe I deserved one." He said, "Not just at the diner. Every single day after, you made me want to be better. Not richer, just better." Ellie tried to speak, but emotion swelled in her throat. "I don't care where we are, what we do, or how much we have," Reed said softly. "I just want you, the real you, the woman who handed me a plate of food when she had nothing, the woman who changed everything." He reached across the table, his hand palm up, a silent question, a choice. Ellie stared at it. So much had happened, so many days spent doubting herself, so many nights spent wondering what could have been. But now sitting across from the man who saw her, not as a project or a mistake, but as home. She knew exactly what to do. With trembling fingers, she reached out and laced her hand into his. The moment their hands touched, something in her settled. Not fireworks, not sparks, just peace. The kind of peace that came when two broken pieces finally found a way to fit. Neither of them spoke. They didn't have to, because this time they weren't starting over. They were starting together. That evening, as the sun dipped low over Charleston, painting the sky in strokes of amber and rose, Ellie and Reed walked together along the quiet streets near her apartment. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. There was a comfort in the silence, the kind that only came when two hearts were finally beating in rhythm. The world around them didn't change. The diner was still small. Her apartment was still cramped. The sidewalks still cracked beneath their feet. But Ellie no longer felt trapped in her life. She no longer felt like she was surviving in a world that refused to see her. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt chosen. Not for a job, not for a role, not for convenience, but for who she was. They stopped at her doorstep. The air was still. The wind had quieted. Reed turned to her. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. "Not this time." She smiled, tired and hopeful all at once. "Good," she whispered, "because I'm done running." There was no grand speech, no cinematic kiss. Just two people who had already lost and found each other once, and weren't going to let go again. In the weeks that followed, Reed rented a small home in Charleston, away from the cameras, the conferences, and the corporate grind. He took meetings remotely, scaled back his role, and started building something more than just a tech empire. He started building a life. Together they found rhythm in the ordinary. Grocery shopping, coffee dates, late-night walks with Ellie's mom, who instantly adored him. Reed still wore a suit from time to time, but more often he wore jeans and a t-shirt, pushing a cart beside Ellie in the grocery store, holding her hand without shame or hesitation. They laughed, they argued, they made plans, not dreams of yachts or islands, but of belonging, of realness, of love, because in the end, Ellie hadn't chosen a world of wealth, or walked away from it. She had chosen herself, and Reed had chosen her too. So often we believe the biggest moments of our lives will come with fanfare, with fireworks, flashing lights, or headlines. But sometimes they arrive quietly. Sometimes it's a plate of food passed across a counter, a handwritten note in a thick envelope, a plane ticket to the unknown, or a man returning not with diamonds or promises, but with humility and the courage to say none of it matters without you. Ellie Carter's story reminds us that the line between struggle and success is razor thin, and sometimes the only thing that separates them is a single act of kindness. She didn't give with expectations. She didn't help for glory. She saw someone hungry, and she fed him. That's it. But that choice rippled. It became a turning point not just for him, but for her. Because when kindness is given freely, it finds its way back, sometimes in the form of opportunity, sometimes in the shape of love, and sometimes as the very thing we didn't know we were missing: belonging. Reed and Ellie didn't fall in love in a ballroom or across some glamorous skyline. They found each other in the mess of real life, in doubt, in second chances, in shared silences. Their story isn't about a billionaire rescuing a woman, or a woman saving a man. It's about two broken people choosing each other, even when the world told them they didn't fit. And if you take anything from their story, let it be this: the smallest thing you do for someone today could change the course of both your lives tomorrow. So, be kind, stay open, don't be afraid to choose love, even when it terrifies you. Because sometimes everything changes in the most unexpected places, like a stormy night, at a quiet little diner where someone chooses hope over fear, and that makes all the difference.